What happened? Why did Labour do so badly in the EU elections?
Well, people wanted the opportunity to vote Remain, those who aren't on the right, particularly with Nigel Farage doing so well leading his Brexit party. That was the real and present danger, and of course he stands now for a no-deal Brexit. Now, you said in your introduction that these are the extreme ends of the spectrum. Remember, the policy of the state 3 years ago was to remain in the European Union. It was the policy of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party and pretty well everybody except the extreme right. And the problem that Labour had was that it had an uncertain message, and in particular, to be absolutely frank, even though our policy was to have a referendum on a Conservative deal, Jeremy Corbyn never came out and said that categorically, and people didn't trust us.
Is it because he's Eurosceptic himself, or is it because he's trying to position himself for a general election? Well,
he would like a general election and a change of government. He also, his philosophy so far has been that if you seek to appeal to both sides, you might get both. Instead of which, let's be blunt, what happened is we got neither, and there was a massive defection to the Lib Dems and the Greens, including, I should say, amongst Labour Party members. I mean, this went right to the core of the Labour Party, because the position which we're now in as a country is not a question of extremes, it's a question of being sensible, and the only sensible policy for the state at the moment is to have a referendum, probably on something like Theresa May's deal, maybe on no deal if it's the only Brexit that's on offer, with the alternative being to stay in the EU, and that clearly is where the Labour Party in the centre ground of politics is going to be.
OK, so you think Labour has basically been sitting on the fence, right, when it comes to Brexit. Are we going to have a strong kind of idea from Labour on where they stand on Brexit soon?
The Labour leadership has been sitting on the fence. Labour members, including most Labour members of Parliament, came off the fence a long time ago and have now for many months been in favour of a referendum. And indeed, we voted twice in the House of Commons overwhelmingly for a referendum. The issue in politics at the moment is for the Labour leadership to come off the fence, to back a second referendum, and then I believe there'll be a coalition which can support that in the House of Commons.
Will Jeremy Corbyn do that?
I believe he will, because the pressure on him is so great. John McDonnell, who is the Shadow Chancellor and effectively his number two, came out explicitly in favour of a referendum with an option to remain yesterday. Diane Abbott, who is at the right hand of Jeremy Corbyn, she said the same on the radio this morning. I think it's now just a matter of time before it happens.
Are we closer to hard Brexit under a new Tory Prime Minister?
Well, we're in a very curious situation where the next leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister may say that they're in favour of a hard Brexit if they can't get some new kind of deal through. But the House of Commons voted by a majority of more than 200 last month against no deal. There is not the remotest chance that the House of Commons will vote for no deal. People like Philip Hammond, David Gork, a whole lot of moderate Conservative ministers, they would vote with Labour for a referendum rather than no deal. So even if somebody like Boris Johnson were to come in formally committed to no deal, it's not going to happen. And if the choice is no deal or a referendum to remain, there'll be a majority in the House of Commons for a referendum.
But Robin, is that right? Because it could happen, I guess, if is it the Queen that then has to choose between the will of Parliament and the will of the government if they actually make a government policy?
I think technically it's possible for the government to ignore the will of Parliament and not allow the no-deal option to run through the parliamentary process. But as Jeremy Hunt has noted today, that would be an act of self-harm for the Conservative Party, the view is. So politically, you might be able to force through a no-deal Brexit, but you would then lose the capacity to be able to govern in Parliament. You'd be driven to an election which he believes they would then be deeply punished at. So I think it technically is possible and be incredibly difficult. I'm wondering if I could throw a question back to Lord Adonis just quickly here on, would you think Labour, if there will be a new Conservative leader of some sort, maybe they get some type of a deal that the Conservative Party is negotiating, would the Labour Party allow a referendum, a confirmatory referendum, on a deal that it did not negotiate and did not support? Because this has been part of the problem is, does it have to be a Labour deal, which is then a confirmatory referendum on, or could Labour support a confirmatory referendum on a deal negotiated, let's say, by Jeremy Hunt or by Boris Johnson?
The Labour Party has already voted in the House of Commons in favour of a referendum on any deal with an option to remain. So I think it would be perfectly possible for Labour to support a referendum on a revised deal, provided the alternative was to remain, and then Labour would vote in favour of campaign in favour of remain. And that's how I think politics is going to pan out. Indeed, I think if I were Boris Johnson, I would want to get to that position as soon as possible, because what Theresa May and David Cameron have shown is that trying to make Brexit work is essentially unviable. It has now destroyed two prime ministers in a row, and I think they sense it will destroy them too. So though they will say, for the purposes of the Conservative grassroots, that they're in favour of no deal and extreme Brexit and all of that, what they actually want is the majority to assert itself in Parliament and to dispose of Brexit so that they can move on.
OK, I have like £1 million questions for James, but first, so do you think that Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, shows up and says, actually, guys, says, no, I'm renegotiating with the EU, but he puts forward a deal that will not be dissimilar to the one that Theresa May negotiated?
Well, Boris Johnson doesn't have any particular views on Brexit. He went along with hard Brexit because it was opportunist, attractive
right,
at the
but
time.
it's probably thanks to him that Brexit went through.
Yes, it is. I mean,
right.
he argued strongly for a course in which he didn't really believe. He doesn't really believe for or against. He'll go along with anything that's viable politically
But Johnson,
for him.
Prime Minister, cannot say, actually, guys, you know, it was a mistake, let's not do Brexit,
No.
or can he?
No, well, I don't think he'll do that. What he could do, though, and what I think is very likely, is allow a referendum to happen in which he will campaign for no deal or some hard form of Brexit, sure, in the knowledge that it will be defeated in the referendum, and then he can blame the voters and then move on. And I think that's by far the most likely way forward in the next few months.